Gypsy Rose Blanchard thought that getting pregnant and having a baby was going to water down her public image and make her more likable, and it's done the exact opposite. So many people are concerned about the unborn baby and Gypsy's overall mental stability to take care of a child for good reason. Not only because she unalived her own mother, but because she displays blatant characteristic traits of a narcissistic person, and she also displays some antisocial personality characteristics.
She has been using her being a high-risk pregnancy against Ken. So even though they're not together, and they still currently are not together, he's around. They don't live together. He's not staying at Christy's house like he was before. But Gypsy says that she doesn't need the stress for the baby's sake, and she's a high-risk pregnancy, so he doesn't want to stress her out. Child, but they still are not together. But she is definitely holding that baby over Ken's head. Is that news? No, because we know she's a grifter. She always has to be the victim.
Now, what's going on with you today? Thank you for joining me. Today we are talking about the increasingly complicated and dramatic situation surrounding Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Ken Uker. If you've been keeping up, you already know this relationship has had its share of twists and turns, but recently, things have taken a sharp and unexpected turn. And let me tell you, it's only getting messier from here. There's been plenty of speculation surrounding Gypsy and Ken's relationship, with people assuming the two might have already split up. And honestly, with all the signs pointing to trouble, that assumption wouldn't be too far-fetched. But here's the thing, despite everything that's been ongoing, we still see Gypsy and Ken together at family gatherings. And you might be wondering, why? Well, buckle up because there's a major reason for that, and it's about to get pretty real. The reason why Gypsy and Ken are still in each other's lives, even if things seem rocky, is because Gypsy is pregnant with Ken's baby. That's right, Gypsy's pregnancy has created a bond between them that, whether either of them likes it or not, is now permanent. But here's where things get even more complicated. It's being speculated that Gypsy knows this and is using the pregnancy as a very way to keep Ken in her life.
You think that Gypsy is financially abusing Ken to keep him in line, and I absolutely agree, and I am going to go over what financial abuse is and how people use financial abuse as a means to control their partner. Having been in a financially abusive relationship for 14 years, I am very aware on how abusers use finances or the lack thereof to keep you in control or keep you submitted to what they want you to do. The power imbalance is what creates abusive relationships. The abuser wants to have complete control over you, and we've already seen that in Gypsy's behavior towards Ken. She wants complete control over him. So financial abuse can sometimes look like the other partner just withholding money from you by, say, giving you an allowance and not really giving you any access to money outside of that allowance. And then you have to use that allowance to pay bills, buy groceries, do whatever is necessary, but that's all the money that you get. So that's one example. Financial abuse can also look like your partner sabotaging every single job that you have by constantly calling or texting and making you so anxious while you're at work that you make mistakes and end up losing job after job after job. It can also be financially abusive if your partner just comes and sits at your job while you're working. Imagine how anxious you'd be if they did that every single day, and then you're nervous, you're gonna lose your job. Financial abuse can also look like you working several jobs while your partner isn't working any job. And then last but not least, and this is what I think is happening with Ken, your partner can be so overly codependent on you that even the mere thought of you going to work has them spinning out of control, thinking that you're going to be at said job, cheating on them with some other person. So they won't even allow you to work because they are obsessed with the idea that if you are out of their sight in any way, shape, or form, that you're going to cheat. I think that's what's going on with Ken and Gypsy. I think she is so incredibly insecure to have him out of her sight that she is keeping him so close to her that she is literally smothering him with love. and obsession. So another thing that I wanted to mention is that narcissists do not view people as people. They view people as conquests, things to achieve. So we all know that Ken broke up with her while she was in prison. Well, this detrimented her ego, and it deflated her ego to the point where she was obsessed with not him, but getting him back, just so she could raise her self-worth by having this man. She doesn't necessarily love him. She loves the idea of having him because in her mind, she believes that he is the best that she can do. I mean, look at her and look at him. And I don't want to really bring Ryan into this a lot because I feel like Ryan is a good guy and was manipulated by Gypsy as well.
Because let's be honest, if there wasn't a baby involved, Ken might have already walked away. But now, he's got a lifelong commitment, his child, and that alone is enough to tie him to Gypsy. Let's break this down a little more. When Gypsy and Ken rekindled their relationship, Gypsy was quick to say that she knew Ken was the one for her. And I guess she meant it, because just a month after getting back together with him, she was already pregnant with his child. This wasn't just a coincidence. It shows how intentional Gypsy was in ensuring her connection to Ken was solidified. Compare that to her previous relationship with Ryan Anderson, and the contrast is stark. Remember, she spent 3 months with Ryan, and during that entire time, Gypsy says actively she tried not to get pregnant. She even admitted on her reality show, Life After Lockup, that she took her sister Mia's advice and used Plan B when she suspected she might get pregnant by Ryan. Gypsy was making conscious decisions to avoid creating a lasting bond with Ryan.
A couple days ago, I went to the bedroom, woke Ryan up. I said, I need to tell you something. He said, I'm asleep. I said, I miss Ken.
He must have woke up quick.
He did, and he was like, you need to let that go. You need to let him go. You are married. And I'm like, I know I am. But I think that we both need to come to terms with the fact that I have 2 men in my heart. And he's still there in my heart. This is the day before Valentine's Day, too.
So what does that tell us? Well, for starters, Gypsy clearly didn't see a future with Ryan. She wasn't trying to start a family with him, and in fact, it seems like her marriage to Ryan was more about convenience than love. While she was still in prison, Gypsy married Ryan, but it feels like it was more about having someone on the outside who could offer her companionship and some semblance of support. Ryan was a placeholder, a stand-in for the emotional comfort she craved while dealing with the isolation of incarceration. Once she got out of prison, the dynamic shifted entirely. Gypsy seemed to use Ryan for appearances, almost as if she needed him to maintain a certain public image. He was a shield, a buffer between her and the outside world. But then, as soon as Ken, her ex-fiancé, came back into the picture, Gypsy's priorities changed dramatically. It wasn't just a gradual transition either. It was an immediate and decisive. The emotional energy she had been directing towards Ryan was instantly redirected to Ken. It's as though Ken's return made her realize that Ryan was never really who she wanted, and she didn't waste any time making that clear. And here's where things get wild. Gypsy began expressing dissatisfaction with her marriage to Ryan and actively started pushing for a divorce. Why? Because she knew Ken was back in her life, and she didn't want anything standing in the way of reconnecting with him. Gypsy has always seemed to have a deep-rooted fear of being alone, and when Ken resurfaced, he became her new emotional anchor. It was as though she could finally see a clear path forward, and that path didn't include Ryan. Once Gypsy was certain that Ken would stick around, Ryan became irrelevant to her. He wasn't part of her plan anymore, and she acted accordingly. Now let's talk about Ryan for a moment, because it's important to acknowledge what he went through in all of this. Ryan was absolutely hurt by Gypsy's actions. From his perspective, he had likely been led to believe that Gypsy genuinely loved him. She manipulated him into thinking their marriage was built on something real. But the moment Ken re-entered the picture, she made it clear that she regretted the relationship and was ready to move on. The justification Gypsy gave for leaving Ryan, she claimed that they were on 2 separate paths and that her path had somehow reconnected with Ken's. On the surface, it might sound reasonable, but when you dig deeper, it feels incredibly calculated. Gypsy knew exactly what she was doing. Ryan was left to pick up the pieces of a marriage that was never meant to last. Fast forward today, and Gypsy's divorce from Ryan has officially been finalized. According to reports, the judge approved their agreement, and while there is no spousal support involved, they did have to divide their shared property. With the legalities behind her, Gypsy is now free to focus entirely on her future with Ken.
Rose Blanchard settles her divorce with Ryan Anderson. Sources tell TMZ that the judge has officially signed the divorce papers, meaning they both can get their copies now. But she would have known that the day she went into court. What is said by the judge that day when he orders the judgment is that he's granting the divorce, it's done. But a lot of times judges don't sign the paper and give you a copy. It can take weeks sometimes to get your copy. However, it's done. It was done and finalized the day she went into court, and that's what the hearing was for. But it is now completely settled because the judge has signed off on the paperwork. Gypsy Rose Blanchard is finally putting her first marriage behind her. Looks like both she and Ryan Anderson have reached a settlement in their divorce. According to a court clerk, a judge hadn't yet signed off on it. That's typically how it goes. Ryan's lawyer, Jeffrey Carrier, tells TMZ his client skipped the court appearance to save on those pricey attorney fees.
And if you've seen her recent interviews, especially those tied to her book promotions, you'll notice that she's wasting no time painting a picture of her perfect little family with Ken and their baby. It's a narrative that aligns perfectly with her current goals. But it's worth asking how much of this is genuine and how much of it is a carefully crafted story to make her desired image intact. But let's look at this for what it really is. Gypsy is putting her child right at the center of everything. She's talking about building a family with Ken, and while that might sound wholesome on the surface, there is an underlying motive here. Gypsy is using her pregnancy to keep Ken closer to her. Because think about it. What would happen if Ken publicly announced that he is separated from Gypsy? Especially now when she's expecting a baby and only a month away from giving birth. The backlash he would receive would be huge, and Gypsy knows that.
Proved to me that Gypsy Rose Blanchard is a very, very high-risk pregnancy. The reason why is unknown to me, but I've been told that she has been using her being a high-risk pregnancy against Ken. So even though they're not together, and they still currently are not together, he's around. They don't live together. He's not staying at Christy's house like he was before. But Gypsy says that she doesn't need the stress for the baby's sake, and she's a high-risk pregnancy, so he doesn't want to stress her out. Child.
On top of that, it's now being reported that Gypsy's pregnancy is considered high risk and complicated. And you know what that means? Ken can't just walk away right now. Gypsy is using this situation to her advantage, keeping Ken in line by reminding him that any stress or upheaval could affect her health or the baby's. And let's be real, no man wants to feel responsible for something like that. So Ken, for now at least, is stuck. Now, is this surprising? Not really. If you followed Gypsy's story, you know she's been through a lot. And one thing about Gypsy, she knows how to make herself look like the victim. It's almost like a survival mechanism for her. If Ken were to make the wrong move, like leaving her, Gypsy could easily paint him as the villain. And guess what? The public would probably side with her, especially since she's pregnant. And let's not forget, Gypsy has already hinted at this whole thing before. Back in July, when she first announced her pregnancy, she gave an interview to People magazine. In that interview, Gypsy said something really interesting. She said, "I am not going to say that I think the baby will help a marriage or a relationship because obviously there is the added stress. I know that realistically there's going to be arguments too. But Ken and I both come from divorced parents, and one thing we absolutely agreed on from day one, even back when we were dating in 2017, is that we have a child. We'll stick together for the long haul. This is a forever thing because we don't want our child to grow up in a broken home." Let's unpack that. Gypsy basically telling Ken and the entire world that he has no choice but to stick around. She's using the broken home argument to guilt Ken into staying with her for the sake of their child. She's planting these ideas in the public's mind. So if Ken were to walk away, he would be seen as the bad guy who left his child to grow up without both parents. And don't think of a second that this is an accident. Gypsy even mentioned something similar on Nick's Vile's podcast. She said she didn't want her pregnancy to trap Ken or force him into proposing. But come on, that's classic reverse psychology. By saying she didn't want to force Ken, she actually creating pressure for him to step up and propose anyway. It's a subtle but effective way of manipulating him into staying.